Thank you for joining us today. We will begin promptly at 11 o'clock. Okay, well, thank you everyone and good morning. Thank you for joining us today. I am Trinity Court. I am the Financial Services Solution Advisor for the Center for Professional and Executive Development. I'm excited to have you here with us today and to hear from Betsy. I would like to mention that today's webinar is being recorded and a link of the recording will be made available within the next few days. Before I introduce Betsy, I'd like to share a few words about the Wisconsin School Business Center for Professional Executive Development, or as we like to call it, CPED. The Center for Professional Executive Development offers programs and certificates that will give you the modern, relevant skills needed to advance your career. All of our programs offer interactive live learning sessions facilitated by instructors with practical business experience. CPED also partners with organizations and associations like yours to provide customized professional development programs, coaching, and consulting. For more information, please visit our website at uwcped.org. I also would like to share that we might not have time for questions at the end of today because we have a lot of great information to share with you. If that is the case, please write those questions down. And at the end of the program, Brooke will be sharing some information with you all on how you can reach out and contact us so you can get answers to those questions. And now I'd like to hand things over to Betsy.
Helps when I go off mute. Hi, everybody. My name is Betsy Hagan, and thank you, Trinity and CPED, for inviting me to speak today. So I have been with CPED for a number of years. Currently am the program director for the Foundations of Management certificate, which includes our boot camp program, also coaching and motivating, and our teams programs. And before that, I spent the majority of my career in HR, primarily with two companies, Aon Hewitt, big HR consulting company in Lincolnshire, Illinois, and early on in my career, Baxter Healthcare, medical manufacturer in Deerfield, Illinois. And so the majority of my time has been spent, again, whether it was in the private sector organizations or consulting now and leading classes, really just focused on helping managers and leaders who have people responsibilities figure out how to, support them in the best way that they can, and think about just how people management supports overall business strategy and the ability for organizations to accomplish whatever strategic goals that they might have. Why do we talk about this at all? Why do we have such popular programs that are focused in on supporting not just first-time managers, but people who maybe have been leading for a long time, but now they're leading maybe in different contexts. Maybe they're leading hybrid teams instead of, face-to-face in the same location teams. Maybe they are in new organizations with new challenges. In any case, right, we know that the idea of unwanted turnover in organizations is expensive. I have down here 2 times the cost of annual compensation, but for those of you who have some experience know that that number can go up pretty quickly. All it takes is, you are looking for somebody with a specific set of skills or a particular kind of experience, or you are in a geographic location that doesn't necessarily have a wide or deep pool of talent to choose from, and you may end up having to bring people in and then relocate them to wherever you need them to be. Whatever it is, that number, those variables can create a situation where those numbers goes up significantly. And the one thing that we don't always think about, this is not just in the actual hard cost of having to recruit people, right, and hire them, but I think it's more devastating in terms of the cost of loss of productivity that tends to happen when you have unwanted turnover, right? So it's a stressor on the people who are there, who stay, who have to pick up the workload, or the inability of the organization to accomplish its results because it doesn't have the talent that it needs to do so, and or you don't have the right talent in the right place at the right time. Whatever the circumstance is, the cost of that unwanted turnover really can create a lot of challenges. And the idea of why people leave organizations, there's a whole lot of reasons behind it. But the one thing that organizations can definitely control is the fact that their managers are not contributing to all of those things, the negative perceptions or the negative aspects, right, of how people experience their organizations in a way that creates, a disconnection for them, and they feel like they have to leave or they want to leave. And so we think about great management as actually a strategic imperative if you want to find the best talent, keep the best talent, and move that talent around to wherever you need to in terms of applying the skills and capabilities that they have. What you see in the bullets on the other side are just the things that we know through research really impact an employee's ability to become engaged at work. Engagement is a term that I think HR sort of made up as a way to talk more in depth to the idea of employee satisfaction. And I think about engagement, people being really connected to either the work itself or the teams that they're on or the purpose and the meaning of the organization or all of those things, right? The idea is that it's a connective kind of experience that people have. And the way that engagement is sort of looked at in terms of organizational benefit, meaning if you have a highly engaged workforce, they're more likely to serve the organization at higher levels. And so this is not just about standards of performance. It's more like, when the organization is going through some challenges or going through great change, that highly engaged employees are more likely to kind of persevere through that. They have a greater resilience, right? The second thing that obviously that organizations with highly engaged employees are going to get is more likelihood to stay with the organization. And of course, people are not necessarily staying with organizations from cradle to grave any longer. So, but if you were to think about maybe you had a role and maybe you had 2 to 3 years that you would likely have somebody stay in that role before they might be looking for something else, looking for some other opportunity. You might get an extra year out of that. And there's a huge cost benefit to that and a knowledge capture to that I think is really, you can't put that aside and say that isn't something of value. And then the third thing that a highly engaged workforce is going to do for an organization is that they're going to say good things about the organization. And so it's sort of like, what your clients say sort of reflects your reputation in the marketplace. Well, what your employees say about you reflects your ability to attract the best people to come and work for you. And I'm sure we could probably think of a couple of organizations, even if you just thought about from those that you would say, I would never work there, right? They've gotten that reputation primarily because their employees talk about that, right? And so the things in the bullet side on this list are just the things that are some of the things that tend to influence, right, an employee's perception of the organization, and therefore can be connectors to people to become engaged or disconnectors to people being engaged at work. And I think that when I look at that list, there are a lot of things that somebody's direct manager is definitely going to play a role in terms of how that person perceives something like, for example, career opportunities. So if you're an employee and you've never had your manager even inquire about anything that you might be interested in doing in the future, that may in fact send a signal to you that the organization in and of itself doesn't really care about me as an individual and where I might go or what kind of future I might be looking for at the organization. And therefore, it's a disconnect for me, right? Same with things like I think we a lot of people are talking about workplace flexibility, in particular, sort of the where people work, right? And certainly how your manager approaches that, to the extent of even if it is you can or you cannot, let's say, work from home at any point in time because of the nature of the work, still how you approach people and their need for potential flexibility, right? Even if it's just temporary, can make a difference in terms of, again, how that employee feels like they are connected to the organization. And then the last one from the list that I just want to call out is ethics, right? So I think this is a big one in the fact that I have worked with organizations who will declare all day long and in every aspect of their communication at the highest levels of the organization that they are proud of being a highly ethical, an organization which has standards and values. And yet, if you work for a shady manager, so when we say good management matters, it matters to every aspect of organizational culture. And it matters to the idea of organizations can invest significant amount of money in benefits, can significant amount of money in how they pay their employees, how they treat their employees, how they, try to encourage and reward and recognize their employees. And yet having somebody who is not paying attention to the quality of management that they're delivering for their teams can take that entire investment and, basically eliminate the return that an organization could get on it because people don't necessarily want to work in situations where they've got a manager that they feel disconnected from or that they don't see as being part of how they are connected to their work, their team, their organization. And when I think about the best leaders that I've worked with, and in particular, because I'm talking to folks in the finance world, like the best finance leaders that I've ever worked with, albeit primarily in the private sector, they all could sort of see that connection between, if in order for them to communicate effectively, the energy that they're putting into it is not just a check the box moment, but rather the energy putting into it to actually communicate in ways that create connection. And they do that through the idea of belongingness, making sure that people know that they're seen and that they are, appreciated to bring their best selves to contribute to the organization, but obviously to recognize people, to give people clear direction, and to have that ongoing sort of data flow of feedback so that people don't feel like at the end of the year or at some point they're going to be judged without ever having any kind of input from their leader that could have told them, hey, if you just did this a little bit differently, you'd be in a different place. So I think that that's the case that I'm making for why effective management matters. And I think that it is in particularly important in finance functions. We can look at the idea that communication across the board is a key to managerial success. Like I've worked with a lot of leaders and managers. I've yet to meet the person who says I can lead and manage without ever communicating with everybody. I mean, if that unicorn exists, I've yet to meet them. We also know that these conversations, the effectiveness conversations that are going on, really drive engagement, but they also drive performance. So we know things like the clearer people are, for example, about what's then the more likely that they are going to understand how they need to adjust their performance or drive their performance to meet those expectations. Again, I go back to if you've ever worked in a situation where it hasn't really been clear what the goal is, what the objective is, or you've got competing goals and objectives in an organization, people can kind of get off track. And it isn't that they're not willing to put the work in, but if you don't have all people focused in the right directions, with clarity, in that, then the chances are, it's a hit or miss of whether or not you're going to actually meet the kinds of goals and objectives that the organization is setting forth. And then finally, again, I want to tie it back to my experience in dealing with finance functions and really kind of the overall purpose of finance within organizations requires a level of clarity, precision, and absolute alignment to those goals. So I kind of was thinking about this and how would I talk about it specifically to people who are in financial industries and financial functions. And I think about it like I've yet to meet a finance function that just works by everybody's just sort of doing their own thing and out there, right? It's meant to be a sort of focused, pointed, and precision driven kind of uh, um, set of capabilities, right? And conversations that are occurring within the business that make sure that the business knows sort of where they are at any given point in time, the quality and the effectiveness of the strategy and application of strategy that is happening within the organization to achieve, in particular, its financial health and wealth, right? And then the other thing is to just to have that insight into other things that might be happening surrounding the organization that could in fact impact again the organization's ability to meet its financial targets, but also to invest in the way that the organization is thinking about wanting to invest in its future. So I think about all of this in terms of it just sort of comes down to I think that managing people in financial functions is absolutely critical to gain and get that sort of precision point of what the finance function is all about and what it can do for the organization. Because of that, because these conversations, I think, are the way in which um, financial leaders really get their teams aligned, focused, and again, in a precise kind of way. I think that the idea of consideration of what performance management is all about is smart to look at it like a series of conversations that are going to happen throughout the year. And it sounds kind of like this, right? So either on an annual basis, or even if you're working on a longer term, maybe a 5-year strategic plan, right? The organization is going to set forth a picture of where they want to go. Maybe it's market share, maybe it's operational effectiveness or cost management or innovation or some kind of whatever is meant to support the organization's particular goals and objectives for that year. It starts with the business sort of declaring what that is. From there, the entire organization has to look at, okay, so how do we then support the organization to be able to do that? What is our role? What is functionally, what is our role? Tactically, what are our teams doing? And this ultimately has to get down to people to be able to see themselves as part of the contribution that's going to help the organization achieve its objectives. As managers, I think the first thing we have to look at is based on what the organization is trying to do and what our role is in that functionally, again, or if you're an individual contributor and you have a team of people, right? What is my job in all of this? We have to figure out, do we have the right skill set with the people that we have? And if we don't, then it's up to us as leaders to ensure that we are developing that skill set, or we're out there recruiting for that skill set, or we're doing something to close that gap. And then from that point forward, as people are working, doing the things that they need to do to accomplish the goals and objectives that they have, this allows for the manager and the employee, I think, to have a really, hopefully, a tight communication loop that is about not just validation, for example, or the pat on the back for people to get some feedback, right? But actually really insightful information or insightful thought from the leader to the employees about things that they can do to either, again, reinforce their contribution or enhance their contribution. And I see that as a loop that's going on. It's a critical loop because, again, if people get off kilter or they are off base in some way, they are out of alignment with what the organization is trying to get them to do or trying to accomplish, then I think the challenge is that managers need to bring them back into alignment as quickly as possible. So, if you just think about someone running a project, if they are off and you're not giving them any feedback on that project, and that project ends up sort of going off into wrong directions or runs into barriers that they can't resolve, you're the leader to stay connected in some ways. To see this coming or to help the team make the adjustments. Sits on the fact of now you got to go back and you're further down the way and you have less time to sort of correct. The next kind of series of conversations that I think happen are sort of evaluative of performance. And so we think of this obviously as sort of the annual performance review. But I've also seen it in, finance functions where you're doing quarterly reviews and you might be doing reviews post quarterly close, to the point where you're not just talking about what happened financially within the organization, but also how did the finance function support, right, the organization during this time frame. I see this in a number of like the shared services components of organizations. So you see IT will go back on a quarterly basis and say, what is it that we did? What kind of projects did we lead? What kind of implementations did we have? And how did we do? So, yes, it is the annual performance review when I think about evaluation of performance, but I think it can also be other means by which we sit down with people and maybe on just a little bit more formal basis, right? Rather than that ongoing feedback loop. We're talking about what we saw in performance. We're recognizing and rewarding what worked in performance, and thinking about the kinds of corrections or changes that can be made to enhance contribution going forward. Most of those kinds of conversations, or at least the annual performance review, at least in the minds of employees, is attached typically to the next kind of conversations, which is around pay and compensation, right? So how am I going to be rewarded for the work that I've done and the contribution that I've made? And clearly people want to have that. And it's important for us to have those conversations so that people understand how the organization sees them and values them. In addition, I think this is an important place where we do at least an annual check to understand how are we paying in relationship to the external market. So, and the more challenging the economy is or the environment is, where perhaps you've got new competitors in your environment or something else, which might be leaning into people having a thought that they are not as fairly compensated as they think others doing the same kind of work, right, are, that can create a risk for us. So we want to make sure that we're having those conversations, and those conversations are really steeped in data and information, what we're trying to accomplish when we're having pay conversations with people. And then I have this down here as the sort of last in the cycle, but I think it can happen at any point in time. And that is that I think that organizations should at least once a year be talking to their employees about what their aspirations are. If for nothing else, without it, it creates blind spots in organizations. So I don't think that I could not hold a leader accountable that if they never had a career conversation with someone, that they got blindsided because that person was leaving. Like, it doesn't mean that people are going to tell you that they're looking for something else, but at least keeping the dialogue open, I think, is the right thing to do, because you want to know what your risks are. And if you've got great talent out there, but they, are looking for something else, or they have aspirations that might take them outside of your organization, it's important that we're engaged with them so that we know that and we have a way to at least work with it and talk about it, and make sure that all employees know that the organization sees them and thinks about them in terms of their future. This all brings us to the framework and model that I'm pointing you guys at, which is the 6 conversations of performance management. This is a book written by Steve King. Steve has been associated with the Center for Professional Executive Development for many years now. He teaches in a number of other programs, but teaches in our boot camp program, teaches in managing teams effectively. And this is a framework that he and I and a number of other people at CPED have really focused in on as a way to, in particular, talk to new managers in regards to, so you've taken on the responsibilities of being a manager, now what? And the 6 conversations is a way to talk about what I think are 3 big chunks of responsibilities that people managers have, and to give them some simple ways to think about it. And that's what we're going to work through just in the time that we have left. So Steve sort of takes this slide. I'm going to go back. So this slide, right, and looks at it through the lens of, so what is it that employees are asking? And in the first 2 conversations, it's really what's expected of me and what and how should I develop, right? So this is going under the notion that people want to have clarity around, one, what I'm expected to do, but 2, how am I going to be judged? And then the other aspect that they want to know is, and how am I going to make sure that I have all the skills and capabilities so that I can meet your expectations for performance? The second chunk of responsibilities is around providing feedback and evaluation. And we look at those just by simply stating these are our conversations that are going about how am I doing? So an employee wants to know, right, but also how did I do? That's the more formal side of sort of an evaluation. How will I be rewarded and what's next for me? Sort of put these together, although they can be completely separate kinds of conversations, but they are about talking about salary expectations, but they're also a link between motivation and sort of career trajectory or career aspirations. And again, I feel pretty strongly that, organizations who have leaders who are good and practiced at these 2 conversations with people are more likely to be able to not just convey the information that the organization wants you to convey around pay and career, but also to get a lot of data and a lot of intel back from employees about what they care about, how they feel valued, and what they're thinking about in terms of their future. So when I think about goal setting, because we're just going to walk through these and I'm just going to run through them at a fairly quick pace. But when I think about goal setting in finance, we've talked about many of these, but the one that I want to kind of highlight around here is, the idea that the effectiveness of goals in financial functions in the financial industry has a lot to do with supporting um, functional risk management, but just focusing on organizational, or if you are in a kind of financial industry where you're dealing with the public, right? You're talking about your customers' risk management for stability. So there's an idea here around correctness, precise, right? And knowing exactly what we're working on and why we're working on it in ways that allow for financial professionals to be able to really focus in on things like the quality of their work, the completeness, right? And those 2 things to me allow for the ability then for what the output is of, again, whatever you're doing, whatever your function is, to be able to be insightful, again, to either the organization or to maybe a customer or client, right? When Steve talks about goal setting, then he talks about, so what do managers absolutely have got to pay attention to? He outlines 4 conditions for good goal settings. Basically, that the condition for goal setting needs to be an element of fair, aligned, smart, and stretch. So when he's talking about the fairness in goal setting, what he means is that there's a perception by the employee that the goal that, or the expectation for performance, that there's some level of fairness around it. And I'm not talking about that they have the right to say yay or nay to a goal or objective, but rather that it happens through dialogue in a way that the employee can ask questions about it, that the employee can even maybe challenge the goal in terms of how are we going to get this done, or what are the resources to get it done? Because our ability to engage in that kind of conversation, their ability to feel like they've had a chance to talk through it, understand it, ask us questions, again, challenge premises or challenge resources, right? And then work that through is more likely going to put them in a place where they're feeling positive about the goal and or engaged with the goal, right? So if it comes down to me and it's placed on me, then I'm not likely going to necessarily feel engaged with that goal or objective. More so if I have a chance to talk about it, work it, and even maybe adjust it a little bit based on how you are allowing me to participate. That's what Steve means by fair. Alignment is a whole nother thing. So we talked about alignment from the perspective, I mean, we've been talking about alignment originally about the perspective of this goes from the organizational goals to the functional goals to the team goals, ultimately gets down to individual goals. And there's a truth to that, that most organizations will have a flow to the way that goals happen in their organization. But the other side of alignment to me is the idea that through that process of communicating to people what you expect of them, what their goals and objectives are going to be for the year, that you as a leader actually really kind of explicitly connecting their contribution to the bigger things that the organization is trying to accomplish. And the story that I tell that sort of demonstrates this for me, so when I read the story, I was like, oh, yeah, I know what that is, right? The light bulb kind of went off. Is the story that was told about the first time that JFK goes to tour NASA. So I don't know, like 1961, 62, I'm not sure, but um, NASA existed, but it didn't exist until Kennedy really threw a considerable amount of money at it and put us in the space race. And the story goes is that, the engineers at NASA had a plan on top of a plan on top of a plan to take Kennedy around and show him everything. And I'm sure it was practiced and timed. And they were taking him around to the various places. Hey, look at this. Hey, look at this. And the story goes is that he breaks away from his handlers at one point in time and walks over to a guy who's just standing up against the wall, kind of with his arms crossed. And he sticks out his hand. I don't do a good Boston accent, but he says, I'm Jack Kennedy. What's your name and what do you do here? And the guy told him his name, and he said, I'm helping to get a man on the moon. And he was standing next to a mop and a bucket. He was the janitorial staff for that building. And Kennedy walks back over to the head of NASA and he says, I don't know what you're doing, but you got everybody headed in the right direction. And this is what I mean by alignment. And this is what Steve means by alignment. He's talking about this idea that we as leaders have to actually make ways to connect people to the bigger purpose, the bigger objective, the bigger goals that are going on in the organization. That it isn't okay for me to walk into, for example, any of your organizations and just walk up to somebody and say, why are you doing this? And if they say, I don't know, because my boss told me so, I'm going to say, you haven't done everything that you could do to really make this person, right, feel connected. And so I think about it like every time we're having the what's expected of me conversation is an opportunity to kind of have a Jack Kennedy moment here where, your employees would say, well, we're doing this because whatever, we're trying to be the best, we're trying to gain market. We're trying to be the most innovative. We're trying to have the highest quality. I don't know, whatever it is, they should be able to tell that story, and you should be able to reinforce that story for them. As far as like smart and challenged goes, I think that we use smart as a way just to talk about the fact of what you're trying to go for in using any kind of goal setting model. So I don't care whether it's smart or something else. The idea is creating clarity. And I just think that whether or not you use written goals or goals are less formalized, more casual. Perhaps, you might use something like SMART, maybe not as a way necessarily to design goals, but I would certainly recommend that you use it to evaluate the quality of your conversation around goals with people. So, are you being specific enough? Have you talked about, for example, how you're going to measure and evaluate this person against this particular goal? Have you had a robust conversation about not what you think are the resources, but what they also think are the resources that are going to help them to be successful in this goal? And in particular, what is your role? Like, are you talking about, so how are they going to utilize you as a resource in achievement of some goal or objective? The relevancy is just what I talked about. It's the Jack Kennedy NASA story, right? About being able to connect whatever you're asking people to do to something greater in the organization so that they feel connected and that they feel important. And then the last is just timeliness. So how, when are things expected? And in reality, we might have big behemoth goals out there that really need to be broken down and delivered over a course of time. So that's the smartish side of it. On the stretch side, Steve's focus in the book is really around, this idea that somewhere within the goal set that we ask of people should be something which is a little bit more than what they can do. And what we're really getting at here is this idea that what's expected of me should reflect the idea that the organization needs everyone to have kind of a continuous improvement mindset when it comes to their own contribution. So I don't expect everybody's goals to be, have a massive stretch around them, but some aspect of someone's performance or development goal should be something that they haven't done before or are trying at a different level, because we are always trying to improve ourselves. We should always go into everything with a growth mindset, and it supports continuous improvement of, if nothing else, productivity management in an organization. This visual that Steve is from the book just looks at the relationship between motivation and goal difficulty. And so the idea is that, if you have all your goals and they're super easy and you could just phone them in, they're not going to have much in the way of motivational support. They're not going to generate much in the way of motivation energy. But actually the same happens if all of your goals are really hard and or in your mind nearly impossible, right? Because you get the same sort of result, which is, whatever. I'll write the goal. I don't really think I'm going to be able to do it, or it's going to take a monumental um, the effort to get it done. And so the idea here is that we're looking for things that are in that sort of sweet spot, not too easy, not too hard, just something that might be out there that might be one thing that a person would be working on that would support them in continuous improvement. When you have those things that are in that challenging category, I think it immediately leads to this idea that there are development opportunities for people. And again, development doesn't have to be, I'm going to a class or I'm going to go to I'm going to enroll in something. Development can just be this idea of you're going to try something at a different level, you're going to work on something in a different way, you're going to add something to your skill set, maybe within your current job and within the current goal set that you have. So I definitely think within that stretch performance, right, there's some aspect of development that's going to be in there, and it's up to you as a leader to kind of pull that out. I also think hidden within the career aspirations conversations, right, is something around potentially where people need to develop. You have somebody who says, oh, I want to be a manager someday. Well, then, maybe they should be working on how they give feedback to their colleagues, or their ability to work on their communication skills or their emotional intelligence, something like that. And then hidden within job descriptions also are development goals. I think about this more from a perspective like contingency planning as a leader. We have to look at whether or not we have all the right people in all the right positions with the same knowledge, skill sets. And so occasionally, you get to a point where you've got somebody who's been around for a while and has a really deep knowledge of something. And then what happens if they're not around anymore, that they leave? And now you've got a much deeper and bigger issue when it comes to the loss of knowledge, the loss of productivity. So I think development goals need to be sort of surrounded on those three things. Um, how adults learn best hasn't really changed much in in many, many years, right? People learn best by doing. Adults learn best by doing. We know this, right? It doesn't mean that having access to people who know more or going to formal education experiences aren't beneficial. They are. They just aren't the major way that we learn. And so when I think about how we take people from asking them to stretch in their performance, giving them the chance to do that while we are coaching them, I think is a big thing. So you have about 90% of people's ability to learn quickly and then have it be sticky. If you have experiential kind of activity you're doing as you're learning, but then when you marry it that with either mentoring or coaching or shadowing or some other way that you're getting exposure to someone who is, again, either more senior than you, more experienced than you, or you simply are able to have them there to ask questions and to sort of reflect on performance, is going to go up. And then the 10% of education is good for people. Sometimes I think that helps people really solidify the idea that they are in fact learning something. And I know that in some aspects of finance or certain circumstances within finance, you might need formal education as a way for certification to meet certain regulatory requirements or things of that nature. When I think about that mentoring and coaching, if it's you as the manager who is really doing all of this, then I think that the one of the biggest things that you're doing along the way as people are developing, but just also just working, is this idea of providing coaching by giving people feedback. And again, feedback is meant to provide people with insight into how they're doing and giving them a sense of, reinforcement of behaviors that they've accomplished or skills that they've accomplished, but also constructive feedback to help them to understand where they can adjust in order to adjust their contribution. Feedback conversations, the way we talk about it and the way Steve talks about it in the book, are meant to be things that are connecting for people. And so what you want is to make sure that feedback is done and framed in a way that's going to present itself as simple, honest, right, perspective, and not brutally honest, delivered with empathy, always future focused. We don't use feedback as a punishment. Like whatever we're talking about, even in terms of, really important changes that somebody might need to make, it's always with the belief and understanding that it's to go forward in a to get to a better positive future state, right? And then the last thing is that, we show up with curiosity, meaning we're talking about performance, we're talking about what people can do. They will have their own ideas as well, and we should be curious about what they think and what they say about their own capability. Steve presents in the book a framework. I'm not going to go through a ton of it. I suggest you guys, if you have an interest in it, take a look at the book to see what this is all about. There is a second book that's called Brag, Worry, Wonder, Back, is just on the feedback model. But essentially, brags are about things that are going well in performance. Worries are things that are not going so well. And then Steve puts in there this idea that there are times when we want to engage with people and talk about performance, where it's not really about judging whether it was good or bad. We have more wonders about it. This is where we enact our curiosity. So it might sound like, I'm wondering, it happened in the meeting the other day. I noticed that when people, were sort of critical of some of your ideas, you seemed through your body language and you became very quiet, that clearly you were not in a good place in taking that feedback from them. And I'd like to talk about, what happened. And I hadn't seen that before. So, maybe there's something we can work on going forward, right? That sometimes it's not about the criticality of something, but rather it's just engaging with people. And then Steve includes Bet in the model so that we as leaders always remember to move the conversations forward. So it could sound like, I bet if we talked about it, we could kind of work through this. Maybe there's some strategies we could come up so that you didn't, that you wouldn't get so defensive in if people are critical of your ideas going forward. What we're trying to do in this process of giving framework and language to leaders is to just understand that when you deliver feedback to people, it may in fact affect their self-esteem. And so we want to make sure that we do it in a way that is careful and cautious, and done so with the hope that people are able to hear what we have to say versus just becoming defensive, especially if we're delivering constructive feedback. And so when we think about it, what are we trying to do? Again, whether you use this model or you have other models of feedback that you particularly like, the idea is always that what we're trying to do in these conversations is to promote two-way dialogue, to use the conversations to continue to build that trusting relationship, but also to make sure that we as leaders are not just talking to people when a problem exists, that we are using feedback to demonstrate that we see their whole performance, not just problems in their performance. And I think that's something that, when we think about what we do and how we use conversation, I think that's one that, we might have a lot of one-on-ones scheduled with people, but that doesn't mean that we think about what's the last time I've given this person some positive reinforcing feedback, right? Lots of times those one-on-ones become just about what's the problem we need to solve, or what's the update you need to give me. And so I think in this means Steve is just really telling us and suggesting to us, right, that that feedback is a major way that we are capable of connecting with people and creating connection for them to what they do and who they do it for. So then in the last two conversations that Steve has in the book, the How Will I Be Rewarded and What's Next for Me conversations, I connect these two in ways that I think about the fact that very often we would only mostly be engaged with people around the pay conversations or the rewards conversations as it relates to how your organization does compensation. So if you do it once a year, you do it post the performance review, then we're going to engage with it. The challenge, though, is that people want to have conversations around rewards and recognition and motivation. And so sometimes it is outside of the cycle, it's outside of the process, and people may want to talk about it. I think that leaders being very open to and understanding that this might be important things that our employees want to bring to us and engage with us on, allows us to do a couple of things. And I have three of them out here. One is to understand and to assess how they see the meaningfulness of their work according to their motivation. So if someone is coming to you saying, I've been doing this for a long time and I'm kind of burnt out, right? It tells you something about the fact that they're coming to you and maybe looking for something else because they're they need re-energized by something. I also think that it's a good place for us to have an understanding of what people see in terms of marketable skills. So it can be linked to development conversations that we have. And then obviously people might want to hit it head on, to be able to talk about it, if nothing else, their perception of how the organization values them. And this comes in the way of both extrinsic rewards, so money, benefits, those kinds of things, right? Status, promotional ability, but also they might talk about the intrinsic rewards that they get. So how much autonomy they have in making decisions or how much autonomy they wish they had, right? How much they are able to follow the path that they are most interested in building their skill set based on how they see their career trajectory or their how they see themselves in terms of their future professional capabilities, right? I think these conversations, although can be completely separate, get us to some of the same places in the way of what we get back from employees for our understanding, which helps us to assess things like how much risk do we have with that person potentially leaving. But also us being able to get a better sense of the kinds of things that they might be interested in, the kind of things that might generate their energy in a way for us to see, is there a way for us to do it within their current job? Can we create or can we help them to find career paths that would, allow them to go forward? So we talked about extrinsic rewards and intrinsic rewards. Just to hit home with this, the extrinsic rewards are ones that people are going to absolutely have sort of um, a I'm always going to be rewarded. I'm always going to be motivated by this. Like even though people might say I'm not motivated by money, the fact that they might feel like they're unfairly or not fairly compensated, right, can lead to people feeling like they're victimized by the organization. And so even people who will say, well, money is not that important to me. I love the work or I love the context of the work. I hear a lot of people in the public sector will tell me, look, the purpose of what I do and the impact that I have is more meaningful. And yet they may feel like they are undervalued, right, for what they do. And so I think about this from the perspective of it's two sides of what motivates us. We are absolutely motivated by what we get from the organization. These are these extrinsic rewards, right? But we are also motivated by how we feel when we are doing good work. And those are things like empowerment, development, a sense of progress, a sense of purpose, right? And how you engage with people in those conversations and how you are able to make people how you handle, right, that. So for example, if you micromanage people for no other reason than just your need for control, then you're essentially taking away potentially their ability to feel that empowerment, to feel autonomous. And so by your choice, you may in fact be removing something which maybe is important to them and maybe a strong motivator for why they stay or why they choose to put in their best effort. We have to think about that way. Um, the other model that I just want to kind of show you guys is the model of how you engage with people around what they think about when they think about their future. I have a lot of managers who are like, I ask them, so why do you or do you not have career conversations with your employees? And I get a variety of responses. A couple of the common ones are, I don't want to engage with them because I don't actually know what I would be able to do for them. So that's a legitimate, like, I don't want to open up a can of worms and then have people have expectations that I can't meet those expectations. And I think that mindset sometimes gets in our way. I think the other mindset is I don't want people to go anywhere. So why would I be talking to them about their future or what they might want to do differently? Because I don't want them to think about that, right? That's problematic, obviously, because people are, if they're thinking about it, they're thinking about it. Wouldn't you rather know about it? And then the third thing that I say is, or people will tell me is, I've tried to have career conversations and people just go, I don't know. Right. And then it's sort of like, what am I supposed to do, Betsy? And so I have used this model in a lot of ways, but primarily I've used it to engage people in career conversations. And it basically goes like this, right? So I will ask questions that, what are you interested in? What do you like about the current work that you do, I might ask a question around like, of all the things that you did in the past 2 months, like what's one thing that you would look forward to doing again, or you wish you could do more of? What's one thing that you would, maybe leave behind and wish you never had to do again? Just get them talking about where their interest lies. I might ask a question about when you see yourself, the things that you want for your future professional self, and get them talking about that. If I'm their manager and I've been working with them in a while, I have insight into what they're good at, what their strengths are, maybe of the things that they're working on, some of their development areas. And so I'm going to ask them what they think is important about their skill set, their strengths, how they leverage their strength, and again, how they tie in their development to what they might want to do somewhere in the future. Um, and and I can provide some real insight into that. So I'm not trying to lead them. I'm just trying to provide them with either reinforcement of what they already think, or sometimes I find it more often that people don't see all of their strengths, and I'm there to kind of help them flesh out in reality how many strengths they actually have or how strong they are in certain areas. And then the last thing that I do think we as leaders are accountable for having insight to is what is going on within our business or our industry, our area. So just knowing like what is happening with the business in a way that would apply to let's say somebody wants to become a manager someday. And you might say, look, our organization is currently going through a considerable amount of cost management. We are not trying to create new departments, but rather, kind of consolidate things in ways that actually create less managerial responsibilities. So the opportunity might not be as prevalent, but that doesn't mean you can't work on certain skill sets that are going to help you maybe be competitive if those things do become available. So you're able to talk about it from a perspective that's realistic, transparent, without discouraging or trying to like sell people on the idea, oh, you don't want to be a manager because, you want to be something else. Like, I think we're trying to work with where people have energy and what they're trying to do, versus necessarily just guide them in one way. And I know that that is sometimes difficult in financial functions where you may have built a development process for people to basically flow through all of the core competencies aligned with financial functions, right? And you might find that people are, they go through reporting or whatever, and they're like, oh no, I want to stay here, and you're like, no, you're going to have to spend some time in tax, you know cost accounting or whatever, right? So it's to encourage people, right, to make those connections, to help them understand that it's about building skill sets within your. You're not a drive up window for people like, yes, I'd like a promotion and more money, right? But rather, you're there to be a resource to them to help them think about all the things that they could be doing to help them be competitive if those kinds of jobs or opportunities kind of come across. All right, so what are the conversation starters? I've talked about on a couple of them. I think asking questions, what's holding you back from doing your best work, right, is really it's beyond just career or motivation kind of conversations. It's also about your relationship with them and also how they see you as a resource or a person who is supportive of the things that they believe they can accomplish in their contribution, as well as what they might want to do for the future. So I like that one. And I would say if I had to pick all of them, that would be the one that I would say put on your list and just try it out and see how people respond to it, because I think it'll be informative for you. All right, that's it. And I am 1 minute at the time. So in this material, I do have sort of just an overview of each of these 6 conversations, how it works. You guys know already how it works. You're already having these kinds of conversations, but you may have not connected it necessarily to how it can help either in the performance of your teams or groups, or just in building strong relationships with your employees. That's it. I thank you guys for the opportunity to come and talk to you. Again, I apologize for not having enough time to do Q&A, but you guys are welcome to send questions. Brooke will talk about it, and that'll be it. So thanks, Brooke.
Thank you, Betsy. We wanted to let you know that CPED is ready to help you and your team members and your organization further develop leadership and management skills. And Trinity is looking forward to setting up a time to chat with you and talk with you about our Managed Bootcamp program, how we can customize it for your organization. Her email is on the slide, and she looks forward to connecting with you to explore opportunities with your organizations. And again, if you did have any questions on anything that was covered today, you can send that over to Trinity as well, and we will work on getting you an answer to that. So thank you, Betsy, again. Thank you all for joining us today, and we hope everyone has a fantastic day and weekend.